If I'm able to break away on Sunday mornings after Sunday school and just wander the halls here a little bit, I love what I see. I see conversations, I see fellowship, I see people praying for one another. Sometimes you see someone in tears and someone else has their arm around them. But at some point I try to break away from that and I try to sit down in here a few minutes before the service starts. And I do that to just kind of clear my mind. I come in distracted. I come in with the schedule. I come in thinking, what is the next thing I have to do? Will I be there on time? Do I have everything I need to accomplish the next thing I need to accomplish? And I'm distracted. And I don't want to be distracted when I come before God. I want to be able to worship him with undistracted attention and devotion, with a humble heart. And so I will try to come in. I'll try to sit down. And one of the things I'll do is I'll open the bulletin. And I'll find out what the text is for the day. And I'll read the text. And I'll pray over the text. And I'll pray for who's preaching. And I'll pray for God to give me and to give all of us eyes to see, ears to hear, hearts to receive, so that we're not resistant to what God has to say to us, but instead welcoming of it. It's a good practice, and I commend it to you. I love the horizontal things that happen. But for the sake of the quality of those horizontal things, I want to encourage people to come in here and get ready to do vertical things. Maybe a little before 10:30. It's good. If you'd done that this morning, and some of you did, and read the text, you might have scratched your head a little bit. The text is odd, for lack of a better term. It had me scratching my head as regarded its content. It had me scratching my head as far as placement in the book. Why does it say what it says, and why is it placed in the book where it is? Let me explain why I was scratching my head, and maybe it will add some weight to the text when we get there. It's odd in content. What Matthew just read is almost the most compressed version of the entire book of Hebrews you could imagine. Think of a topic in Hebrews, and it's in the 7 verses just read. The unchanging nature of Christ. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Ought to sound somewhat familiar, even though those words aren't used. In 1:10, the heavens perish, but the Son will remain. The Son rolls up everything like a garment. It will wear out, but his years will not come to an end. In chapter 7, he's a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. In 7:24, he lives forever, and he holds his priesthood permanently. The foreverness of Christ has been introduced from the very beginning of the book, and now it's introduced, but with slightly different words in our text. The altar that's mentioned in verse 10 of our passage is mentioned back in verse 7, but it's really hovering over the whole book, because every place you have a sacrifice, where does that sacrifice take place? On an altar. Altars are incredibly prominent in the book of Hebrews, and it's in our text. The tent or the tabernacle, mentioned in verse 10, shows up numerous times in the book. It shows up in chapter 8. It shows up 3 times in chapter 9. And once again, when other things happen or are mentioned, you're brought in to the tabernacle regardless of whether the word appears. So when the lampstand is mentioned, when the Ark of the Covenant is mentioned, when the curtain or the cherubim are mentioned, where are you? You're in the tabernacle. You're in the tent. In verse 11 of our text, we have animals and blood and the holy place and the high priest. I won't even try to mention all the places you could go in Hebrews to read about those things. They're everywhere. The sanctification that was read in verse 12 shows up in chapter 10. We have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. It shows up again 4 verses later. For by a single offering, he has perfected for all time those who are being sanctified. It's the same language, the same teaching that we have here. And there's that foreverness hovering over that also, because for all time. Not just yesterday, not just today, but forever we are sanctified. The reproach that's in our text in verse 13 has been one of the main issues hovering in the background of the letter. And it's at least part of what's caused the people to rethink their commitment to Christ. If we keep on with this Jesus emphasis, how much more of our property will they take? How many more of us will be in jail? How many more of us will be ridiculed and reproached? How much blood will be spilled? Reproach was explicitly the issue in chapter 10:33, where the Hebrew church bore the reproach of the city they lived in. The term shows up in 11:26, where it says that Moses scorned the treasures of Egypt, preferring the reproaches of Christ. Shows up in 12:2, not by word, by idea, with Jesus despising the shame that they placed on him when they hung him on the cross. And now the term's in front of us again. It's been all over the book, and here it is in this passage. Finally, the lasting city, which gets mentioned in verse 14, ought to sound familiar. It was back in chapter 11, where Abraham decided to live in tents, never built a city, because he wanted something better. He wanted something only God could build. And in fact, Hebrews 11 tells us that there is a city with foundations built by God. What makes the passage in front of us a little confusing, a little challenging to preach, is the fact that almost every term, every idea that shows up in these 7 verses are just about begging you to go back to the previous 12 chapters. Because that's what good Bible study does. It's what good exegesis does. You find a word, a term, an idea, and you say, well, how does the author use that? It's not explained in great detail here, but I bet you he explains it someplace else. And he does, for 12 chapters. We won't, relax. We could use these 7 verses to go back and preach the entire book of Hebrews. All the main themes are there. All the vocabulary is there. All the ideas are there. Some have suggested, and I found this helpful, that these 7 verses form almost a table of contents for the book of Hebrews. I like that, but I'm going to suggest maybe going to the other end of a book and say it's more like an index. You know, if you've read a book and it talks about different subjects and it teaches about different subjects, when you're all done and you want to say, I forget, what did he say about priests? I can go to an index. Okay, go to chapter 7, go to chapter 4, whatever. It's more like an index. But who puts a section like that in a letter to a church? Who puts things that just, here's all the subjects we talked about with no real explanation. Who puts that in there? More than that, an index, to the degree that this sort of summarizes it and gives you main ideas of what's there so you can reference back, an index should be at the very end. This is in chapter 13, last chapter of the book, but it's not at the very end. In fact, look where it is. If you have your Bibles open, just look at chapter 13 and how it begins. It is filled with the most concise, practical commands for Christian living that you can imagine. Love the brethren. Show hospitality. Remember those in prison. Honor marriage. Don't love money. Imitate faithful saints that went before. That hasn't been preached yet. That's verse 7. We're skipping over it. We're going to attach it, I believe, to verse 17 in future weeks. Worship God. Do good and share. Pray for your leaders and obey them. That's practical Christian living. 9 distinct commands in just 11 verses. So why, this is where my head was scratching, ready to blow up for the last couple of weeks. Why take this mini condensed version of every subject that shows up in the book of Hebrews and jam it into the middle of this series of practical Christian living? The nature of Christ, of blood, sacrifices, altars, priests that have been dealt with at length. Why do they show up here? I do my preparation on a laptop. I love, my favorite function on a laptop is cut and paste. So if I would have written this, I would have proofread it and I would have said, wow, I kind of interrupted myself. I was talking about practical Christian living, and then I threw this section in about Jesus being the same and about blood and priests and gates and reproach. Tell you what, highlight, Control X, move the cursor, Control V, Control S, save it. Move it. But I'm not inspired, and this author is. There's a reason he interrupts himself. There's a reason it doesn't flow from beginning to end of practical application, and then finally at the end say, well, let's just do this summary verse, and then we'll have a benediction. That flows well, but it's not what he did. And I think he did it the way he did for a very good reason. It took a while to figure out, I'm not 100% sure I've got it all, but I'll say this. I think he wants us to look at this passage with a care that we would not have if it fit more naturally. I think you're supposed to scratch your head. I think you're supposed to cry out to God and say, help, I don't get it. Why did you put this here the way you put it here? There's a better place for it. There's a more natural place for it. When I saw that, and I think I've seen it rightly, it ends up that this passage has challenged me more this past week than I've been challenged by anything in a long, long time. So let's end the introduction, unless you get too distracted by it, and let's dive into the text itself. The main point of the passage is verse 13. Therefore, let us go to him outside the camp and bear the reproach he endured. Let us go to him outside the camp and bear the reproach he endured. That's why I chose a title, Let Us Go to Him. I believe it to be the main point of the passage. But now I want to go a little further. I'm going to get ahead of myself, but it's okay. I think verse 13 may well be the main point of the book, the climax of the book. The reason the entire book is condensed down to just a few verses with all these subjects just mentioned but not developed is because they're leading up to what the author really wants them to do. Go to him. I know he's outside the camp. I know he's been reproached. I know you will be reproached. But go to him. This Hebrew church was drifting away from who Christ is and what he accomplished. And a part of that drifting is due to the fact that when they stayed close to Jesus, when they publicly identified them, they put them in jail. They mocked them. They reproached them. These few verses, I think, summarize the previous 12 chapters in a beautiful way and give us reasons why you should not drift, why you should not just draw near, which is a wonderful thing, but why you should, in fact, go to him, knowing what's going to happen when you step outside the gate, when you step outside the camp, and when you identify with a man that was crucified as a criminal. I'm right about that. If verse 13 is not just the main point of this text, but perhaps even the climax and the main point of the book, it makes sense why we have what we have. And so let's look at it more carefully. I see at least three really good reasons in our text why we should go to Jesus knowing that reproach is going to follow. The first is this. It's verse 8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. You've heard that verse. Some people call it a kitchen calendar verse. You put these nice, wonderful things on a kitchen calendar. I'm waiting for the calendar that comes out that says, our God is a consuming fire, or things like that. I don't know if they'll sell, but I'd buy one. But this is a kitchen calendar verse. You've all heard it, and it's a wonderful verse. I'm not mocking it in any way. It's a wonderful verse. And there's a theological term for what the author has just claimed about Jesus. It's called immutability. Jesus is immutable. Now, before I lose any of you, because you think I just dropped this really heavy theological term on you, if you think you know exactly what it means, you know what mutate means. It means to change at a fairly deep level. To be immutable means you don't change. You can even explain this to your kids because they've watched Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, where apparently this slow, clumsy, non-threatening creature is transformed into the most fearsome warrior. That's a mutation. The X-Men, mutants. Well, if mutate means you change, being immutable means you do not change. And Jesus Christ does not change, according to the author, ever. The same yesterday, today, and forever. And that has at least three powerful implications. The immutability of Christ, his unchanging nature, gives you at least three reasons why you should be able to go to him, even in knowing that reproach awaits you. And the first is this. The promises that God makes, the promises that are secured by Christ, never change. Do you remember last week when Pastor Buzz taught on verse 5? I will never leave you or forsake you. Do you remember putting the slide up there? And he showed us, we had the English, and then underneath he had the Greek, to show that there isn't just one never, there's really 5. I will never, ever, ever, no, ever, ever forsake you. A never, ever promise is secured by a never, ever changing Jesus. Why can God not forsake you? Because Jesus secured the promise on the cross. Apart from that, all God can do, all God must do is forsake us. It is the unchanging nature of the priest who secured those promises for us that means that he can never forsake us. In the letter where the concern is all the things that man can do to me, the author says, what can man do to me? I have a God who will not turn away from me. He will never, ever forsake me, and that never, ever promise is secured by a never-changing Jesus. It's an incredibly powerful connection. Hebrews 7:23. The former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for him. He always lives, he always intercedes, and that's why he will never leave you or forsake you. And it's really good news. A second reason to go to him, knowing that reproach is coming, is that his immutability gives us stability in doctrine. Look at verse 9. Do not be led away by diverse and strange teachings, for it is good for the heart to be strengthened by grace, not by foods, which have not benefited those devoted to them. Imagine if truth, if crucial doctrine that you need and that you need to receive grace from, which is what the text says you get from good doctrine, imagine if it changed day to day or even year to year. I love that I don't have to update my Bible. I never get an email saying, we found some mistakes, download this new software, we've got a patch. I get them all the time for my phone. I know we have some software engineers in here. My apologies to you. You're not perfect. You put out some buggy stuff. I'm still grateful for it, but all the time I'm getting updates because it doesn't work quite like it should work. It must change. The software must change because it's fallible. It's mutable. But not so with the gospel. Not so with true doctrine. We may have to correct ourselves in our understanding, but we don't need to chase down new doctrines because Jesus Christ and his gospel is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And they give us an incredible stability. The third reason to go to him that flows from his immutability is this. Immutability implies perfection. That might sound like deep waters, but it's really not. If you happen to have a systematic theology at home, and if you don't, I suggest you get one. They're really good, and they're really helpful. Go to the index in the back and look up immutability. And it will take you to a section on the attributes of God. What is God really like? And it will explain in some detail immutability, but one of the key things that flows from that is perfection. Why? If I change, I'm either getting better or worse. If I'm getting worse, that's not good. If I'm getting better, it means I wasn't good. Immutability, by its very nature, implies perfection. Jesus doesn't need to change. He is who he ought to be in absolute perfection for all eternity. It's not a new claim in Hebrews. We mentioned it before, that foreverness. He is that perfect one, greater than angels, greater than the priests. It's been taught and implied for some time in the book. I don't know if you've ever considered this, but Satan is not immutable. He's not the same yesterday, today, and forever. As bad as he is now, he is where he is because he fell. He changed. He went from rightly inhabiting heaven to being cast out. Mutable creatures are fallen creatures. And I hope you won't take offense if I tell you that you are mutable. It's actually good news. I mean, you can go home now and say, yes, the preacher said I was a mutant. You are. Thank God you are, that you can change. 2 Corinthians 3:18, we all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image, from one degree of glory to another. Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Philippians 3:20, our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform our lowly body to be like his glorious body. I praise God, I'm mutating. I need to change. I need different heart, different mind, different eyes, different ears, and eventually a different body. And it's coming. I don't want to be the same yesterday or today or forever. I want to change. Jesus has no need to change. He is perfect. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So that's all one reason, really. Why should you go to Christ? He is perfect. He is immutable. The promises are clear. The promises are solid. He secures them. The second reason you should go to him outside the camp is because there's nowhere else to go. Where else will you go to have your sins atoned for? Where else will you go to be able to be in the presence of a holy God, if not Christ? He alone has accomplished what I need accomplished. He alone is an effective high priest. There's many high priests in the book of Hebrews. Hebrews is very clear. There's one that did the job. There's one that got it done. The others were pictures. The others were pointers. I don't need a picture. I need a priest. I need him to be real. I need him to be effective. I don't just need a promise. I need a reality and a fulfillment. And I have that in Jesus. Verse 12 of our text. So Jesus also suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through his own blood. It happened. That verse is really just an echo of Hebrews 10:14. For by a single offering he has perfected for all time those who are being sanctified. Now you know in Hebrews the alternative to Jesus as our high priest is the Levitical priesthood. That Old Testament system that they'd grown up with for 1,400 years. If you're familiar with the book at all, if you've been with us at all these past months, you know that. The author has been relentless in reminding us that what those priests do didn't work and will never work. Chapter 10, verse 11, and every priest stands daily at his service, offering repeatedly the same sacrifices, which can never take away sin. The contrast between the effective work of Jesus, he actually sanctifies his people, and these priests that have been busy for 1,400 years and never taken away a single sin, is what the author wants us to see. He hints at it in other places in our passage. Verse 9, it's good for the heart to be strengthened by grace, not foods, which have not benefited those devoted to them. Who's devoted to foods in this book? The Levitical priests. The people trying to cling to the Mosaic law, considering returning to the Mosaic law. It doesn't benefit you. It doesn't give you grace. Verse 10, we have an altar from which those who serve the tent have no right to eat. It's interesting to me that he calls it a tent. The tent's been gone for 1,000 years. They've been in the temple. It's almost a bit of a slam. It's almost a bit of taking them back and say, you guys have never progressed. You never followed the story. You never followed the arrows forward to that Lamb of God, to that perfect high priest. You're still in the tent. Verse 11, for the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy places by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. It's a reference to Leviticus 16, and I don't know if you know this. The priests got most of their meat from the sacrifices. Somebody brings a sacrifice, they get to take a chunk of it, and that's how they fed their family. Not the sin offering. The sin offering was killed, The blood was sprinkled, the body was taken outside the camp and burned, and it did nothing. And they didn't even get dinner out of it. But it sets us up to understand the next verse. So Jesus also suffered outside the gate to do something in order to sanctify the people through his own blood. At every point in these 7 verses that are mashed together, a condensation of 12 previous chapters, the author is saying this: look, Jesus got it done. The others talked about it. The others pointed towards it. The others hoped. Jesus got it done. I'm going to take a minute, and only a minute. Something really interesting in verse 9. See that word strange doctrine? Strange teachings. Do not be led away by diverse or strange teachings. But what's the reference to? Food. Which is a reference to what? The law given by Moses. How does the law given by Moses become a strange teaching? It becomes a strange teaching when you don't use it the way you're supposed to use it. It had a good purpose, a God-given purpose. Watch for the one who can do what these shadows are only pointing towards. Watch for him. He's coming. I promise you he's coming. He comes. They don't believe him, and they go back to the shadows. I'll give you an illustration. Home screen on my phone, picture of my granddaughter. When I travel, every time I turn on my phone, there she is. I like that a lot. That's not strange. That's good. You have it too. You have important things, important people on the home screen of your phone, on the home screen of your computer. When I go over to my daughter's house and my granddaughter toddles on over with a book and tugs on my pant leg so I can read it to her, if I ignore her and keep looking at the screen and go, wow, she's cute, that's strange. That's really strange. It is strange when you prefer the picture over the person. And that's what he's saying here. All that was promised, all that you have anticipated. John got it. There's the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. We just grabbed that language out of the Mosaic Law and said, it's Jesus. They said, no, it's not. Let's go back to pictures. Let's go back to shadows. And that becomes a strange teaching. No other sacrifice acceptable to the Father. Everything else is strange doctrine. And third and finally, we go to him outside the camp because the camp isn't going to last. The camp offers no lasting safety, no lasting anything. Do you see that in verse 14? For here we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come. It's called city in verse 13. It's the camp, city in verse 14 rather, the camp in verse 13. But the meaning's the same. The camp we are to go outside and the city that doesn't last are one and the same in our text. Why should you risk reproach and rejection by the city? Why should you willingly step outside all the safety, all the approval of those who remain in the camp? Because the city won't last. It will never truly be a home for God's people. We seek refuge in the cities of this world. We seek refuge in the approval of men. Just so you know, he's not talking about a physical city. Jerusalem represented it, but it's much bigger than that. Jesus isn't welcome in Boynton Beach either. He's not welcome in any city on a wholesale basis. The city throws him out. Going to stay in the city, or are you going to go to Jesus? These Hebrew Christians need to be urged, they need to be exhorted to go to him outside the camp because, like us, they want to be liked, they want to be approved, they want security, they don't want to be reproached. And it's helpful to know that city that you're looking for, that culture that you're looking to give you comfort and approval, it's not going to last. Why do you think Nicodemus went to Jesus at night? He didn't want to step outside the camp. Joseph of Arimathea, we read, was a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one for fear of the Jews, although there's a wonderful story of redemption. Who asked for Jesus' body? Who went public? Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. Beautiful story. They both overcame their fear of stepping outside the camp. They both overcame their fear of reproach and gave Jesus a good burial. But prior to that act of courage and faith, of identification with that criminal, they too were afraid to go to Jesus publicly. Identify with Jesus, you will bear his reproach. Scared Peter to death on the night of Jesus' trial. So verse 13, I want to argue, is a main point of our text. It may well be the main point of the book. It is a call for us to go to him outside the camp. It's going to mean reproach. And don't lie to yourself or anybody else. You don't like reproach. And I don't either. We fear it. So if we're going to overcome that fear and obey that text, we need to remember the Jesus that we're going to is perfect. He is the one that secures every promise forever. That promise, by the way, I will never leave you or forsake you, made about 1300 BC, give or take, to Joshua. That was made yesterday. When this letter is written, it's offered to the Hebrew church. It's apparently still good today. And now I offer it to you because it's good forever. The priest who secured that promise doesn't change. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. We overcome fear of reproach by having a perfect priest who secures the best promises. We overcome fear of reproach and go to him outside the camp by remembering there's no place else to go. You distance yourself from Jesus. If you are ashamed of Jesus in this wicked and adulterous generation, Jesus says, I'll be ashamed of you before my Father. And where else will you go? When Jesus says, I don't know you, because you never knew me. You never came to me outside the gate. Where else will you go? I've mentioned John 6 before. I love it. Jesus was reproached. You don't need to eat what the priests eat. You don't need to do what they do. You need to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And people said, you're nuts. And they left. And Jesus turns to the disciples. Do you want to go? And you know what he said, or you know what they said, rather. They didn't say, we love this doctrine. They said, where else are we going to go? You alone have the words of life. One final observation. In this, I mentioned that this challenged me more than perhaps any other passage has challenged me in a while. There's a few references to our position relative to Jesus in the book. In 2:1, we're told, don't drift away. That's a positional thing. It's a motion thing. He's here, and I was here, and now I'm drifting away. Don't drift away. Stay close. Okay, that's one. Another is in chapter 4, verse 16, where we're told we draw near to him. We get closer and closer because we find grace for help in a time of need. So there's another kind of movement and positional thing. You're a little ways away, draw near. You were close, you're drifting, don't do that. Both of those are good things. Both are necessary to the Christian life, but neither quite describes what our text urges. You cannot drift in private. You can draw near in private. You can't go outside the gate in private. You're going public. I don't identify with the values of the city. I identify with the one you killed. And they will reproach you. How you doing on going to him outside the city? You may be drawing near. That's a glorious thing. It really is. You may be checked from your drifting, so you don't drift anymore, but pay close attention and come back. Do those things. They're good things to do. But they're not the same as going to him outside the camp outside the gate and bearing his reproach. What does it look like? I think for most of us, I know for me, it's going to be more boldness. Doesn't mean I'm going to move anywhere physically. There's no door to walk through. There's no gate to go out of. It simply means I quit living in the fear of man and for the approval of man, and I say, that's my God. That's my Savior. It means when Chris and his Awana team raise up kids that at some point they're going to say, I am not ashamed to name Christ. I am not ashamed to name the gospel. How many people that you interact with truly know, not just that you're a Christian. I work with people all the time, and for them, Christian is like saying you're Irish. It has to do with some large ethical, national kind of thing like that. And if you're Muslim, it's because you're in this country. And it has nothing to do with personal convictions. It's just how you were raised and where you live. How many people that you work with don't just know that you're a Christian in that sense, but know that you worship Jesus Christ? Know that you're willing to bear his reproach. It might be behavioral. What jokes do you laugh at work that you shouldn't? What questionable activities do you smile at or even participate in because you do not want to be the outsider? What lines do you blur that you otherwise wouldn't blur? What movies will you go to with a friend that you really would not go to if Jesus was holding the other ticket? Do you go to him outside the gate, outside our culture? What do you do with your money? We're going to be empty nesters in a few years, I think. And my son's laughing back there. Maybe he knows something I don't know. We'll probably downsize. How down will we downsize? Will we care what people think when we downsize? What does it look like to so adopt the values, and not just the values so that you live a little bit differently, but name the name, preach the name, love the name? Will you go to him outside the city? I think it's the main point of the passage. I think it's a good chance it's the main point of the book. Let's pray. Father, we need a perfect Savior, and we have one. He's never changing. It's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So that when you say, I will never, ever, ever leave you or forsake you, we have a high priest who never, ever, ever stops interceding, who never changes in his purposes towards his people. We have an unchanging Jesus who gives us solid doctrine. We have the only high priest that got the job done. And we have the promise of a city to come. This city will not last. This world will not last. It will be judged. It will end. But you have prepared for us a city. Father God, I pray that you would open our eyes, not to the person sitting next to us, but to our own heart, to our own practices, to how we are at work, how we are at school, how we are when we're out with friends, how we are in our neighborhood, and ask, are we going to him outside the gate, bearing his reproach because we love him and trust him above all? We need grace for this. And it says we can come to you for grace. And so we come now, Father. Do it in our lives. Make this a time of transformation for so many of us that have been afraid to go outside the gate. In Jesus' name we ask it.